Good afternoon on what is a cool, bright day. It is Tuesday the 11th of October and I've got a nice hot cup of tea, a cat who is not ours on my lap, and a box to open. So let's get to it. Okay, and what I've got in here is this. This is Green and Pleasant Land, the British 1920s-30s Cthulhu Sourcepack, published by Games Workshop. And this is Games Workshop, give a date, 1987. Okay, so this would have been about the last Call of Cthulhu title that Games Workshop published. It did publish 4. So they would have been, On the Trail of the Loathsome Slime, which, whether you like it or not, is still the greatest title for any role-playing scenario ever. It's a magnificent pun, and also followed up by the less than interesting Nightmare in Norway. There's a dual scenario pack called Statue of the Sorcerer that is also available as well, but we're going to get into this. So, Green and Pleasant Land, the British 1920s to 1930s Cthulhu Sourcepack. This volume is a companion to the 3rd edition of Call of Cthulhu Rules. Now, it's important to remember that Games Workshop did publish its own version of the Call of Cthulhu Rules. Very nice hardback, complete with colour plates, which allows, so technically 5 products then, which allows the full horrors of the Cthulhu mythos to be enacted in good old 1920s to 30s Britain, heat of the empire, centre of civilization, and an all-round top hole spiffing place to set your Call of Cthulhu campaign. What? Featured within are sections on British characters, history, travel, the occult, and much more besides, which provide all the information keepers require for British Cthulhu roleplay. Also included 3 new adventures. The Horror of the Glen, a brutal murder in the Scottish Highlands, is not all that it seems. Could a half-wit boy here have committed such terrible mutilations upon the body of Donald McCall? When the investigators arrive, they may find that the real answer to the question lies within the haunted McMorn Manor, and that the secret may be more than their sanity can bear. Death on the Post, a strange papyrus, a horrific murder, and a plea for help from a respected gentleman. What more incentive could any investigator want? But can the investigator solve the mystery in time, prevent more slayings, and to find the evil behind the mysterious campaign of death? The shadow over Darkbank. Even on holiday, there's no rest for an intrepid investigator. What strange things start happening in the Darkbank tunnel? It might be a sequence of tragic accidents, or it might be something more sinister. Plus, a contribution from the British master of mythos fiction, Brian Lumley. So that's promising a lot, and that's in quite a slim supplement. So let's open this up. So let's just... Does not want to come on. So once we get the book open. So it's also, the book is actually in quite an odd format, so it's a lot taller than your average role-playing book. So let's just compare this with, say, a standard book. So you'll see it's actually not too bad, but in the comparison to other role-playing books, it's a lot slightly taller than the others. Inside, this is compiled by Pete Tamlin. Now, compiled is quite important because this has very much the feel of a collection of White Dwarf articles. White Dwarf 42 being the very first issue which had any Call of Cthulhu coverage. That was Marcus R. Rowland, and it was followed up by some scenarios in White Dwarf 43, and then issue 50 contained the first actual scenario, Watchers of Warwick. And here we've got a list of all the contents, bibliography, and some biographies of notable figures, some fictional, some not. So Carter Howard, the archaeologist, Lady Nancy Astor, Lord Beaverbrook, Sir Malcolm Campbell, are joined by squadron leader James Bigglesworth, or Biggles as he is known. We've got Agatha Christie, MP Tom Dryburgh, George VI, Robert Graves, Jane Marple. So we've got all these potted biographies of thumbnail biographies of notables. That's quite, and then we come on to the character types. Now, the thing is, this is it's basically got the, as I say, got the feel of a White Dwarf magazine, because a lot of the contents are sort of very, very clipped. You know, so like you have a page on communications, or you know, a section on page on crime and punishment. You know, entertainment, public health, and so on. And these are all useful information. And really, for many years, this was the definitive source book for the UK during the period. Now there have been some since. There was the London source book, London box set for from Cthulhu 7. There was a London source book from Chaosium, and then there's a Kingdom of Kingdom of the Blind, which I think was a monograph, which was surprisingly good. And of course, Shadows over Scotland also has its own source book, if you can track it down, or you can wait for Chaosium to republish it. But this, as I say, was for a good many years the definitive source book for the UK for Call of Cthulhu, for many good reasons, because it was solid information, it was entertaining, and the characters we begin with two character types, gentlemen and players. We also have butlers and valets, and the first thing that comes across from this is it's very class conscious and structured. We also have sleuths and sportsmen, all very archetypally British roles, taken from the fiction of the period. So sleuths, obviously, you have Bulldog Drummond and Sherlock Holmes to an extent, and then gentlemen and players, essentially. Gentlemen players it's a cricketing term. So gentlemen are amateur players, played a bit at school, or just go and play. You know, they have a hopefully regular source of income, independent. Players are not necessarily gentlemen, but some are, but they do have an occupation. And butlers and valets are really their archetypal, sort of like aides and companions, as it were. And then we have a list of those occupations and their full stats, skill lists, suggestions given as well. And a lot of these really have gone on to be subsumed into later iterations of Call of Cthulhu, with the Investigator Handbook, Volume 1, and then after that with the more recent Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, which has a greater range of occupations listed in it. We have options for war experience, because that would have been upper mind in many of the player characters, many of the investigators at this period. Not everyone living in the USA would have gone off to fight on the Western Front in France in the Great War, but whereas in comparison in the United Kingdom, many more would have done. And then we have a couple of villains, Merchants of Menace, taken from the fiction of the time. So Carl Peterson, For obviously, the foe of Bulldog Drummond, and the Devil Doctor Fu Manchu. So we're also talking about social life, communications, crime and punishment, we already showed you, entertainment, public health, money and prices, some history. Now, this is not going to be a comprehensive history by any means. It's really touching upon the high points, so Treaty of Versailles, the General Strike of 26, the decline of the Liberals and the rise of Labour during the 20s, so that's politics, the effects of the Zinoviev letter, Ireland, the abdication, and that's really just touching upon the major events of 2 decades. Then we turn to the occult, and of course the first figure that appears is Aleister Crowley, but we've also got the Witchcraft Revival, secret societies, the Society of Psychical Research, including Harry Price, and the Borley Declaration. We've got a timeline for Europe and Britain, 1818 to 1939, so complete. That covers it in a bit more detail, because Europe is just a ferry ride away. You can slip down to the coast, leap onto a ferry and cross it, or even take the night train across the channel, because the trains would literally just roll straight on, would roll straight down to the coast onto a ferry and roll straight off. 14 disasters and timeline, so you can play around with that. Archaeology of the period, huge fascination in archaeology, especially after the Egypt mania that came with the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter and the Earl of Carnarvon in 23. Follies. Follies is just some sort of like the ridiculous pieces of architecture built by the aristocracy in the sort of like the 18th and 19th century, which don't do anything, just litter the landscape. The mythos in Britain, just some of the locations touched upon by the mythos. Aviation during the period, because the great thing about aviation during the period is it's improving, getting better, and flying across to Europe is actually not that difficult. It's possible to get a flight across there. It's not possible necessarily to get a flight for more than a few people, if at all, during the period, until later in the period. But airlines are being founded and so on. So crossing the channel in a few hours is no longer a challenge. Inland waterways. This is important for one of the scenarios. Britain is crisscrossed by a network of canals. And they are still a feature of the country today. They're not used for transport like they were once and they were back then. Now they're for pleasure, and also motoring, because motoring would have seen a rise during the period, and railways. Again, so all means of travel. And the great thing about getting around in the UK during the period is that the travel network is quite dense. The roads are not so good, so you're not necessarily going to motor all over the place, but you are at least going to travel by train and then sort of decant and go off to the nearest location you need to investigate, that sort of thing. Sea travel is also available, especially if you want to travel abroad, or even across to Ireland or Northern Ireland. And then we get to the first scenario, which is Horror of the Glen. And so far, what we've got is various photographs and pieces of period art. And with this, we switch to the delightful artwork of Martin McKenna, the late Martin McKenna, much missed for his artwork. It's so good. And these are such lovely illustrations. He illustrated also quite a lot of early Warhammer Fantasy roleplay content, but here you've got his artwork, I think, on show probably sort of like for the first time, and these are really quite subtle pieces. They're really nicely done, and And here we have the scene of the crime, the scene of the focus of the scenario, the McMorn Manor, which is a fortified manor house. And this is, we have the final kind of scenes when the monster awakens and and come for the investigators. And the Horror of the Glen is a really quite entertaining scenario. It's one that a lot of players in the UK will have actually played if they're of a certain age and played Call of Cthulhu back in the day, because they've got this and this is something they really wanted to play. And it's a solid scenario. Really enjoyed it, and I got to play it a few years ago, and it was fun to engage to play it again. Then we get into Death in the Post. Okay, which is again great artwork from Martin McKenna, lovely artwork, and this is a poisoned pen letter to being sent round by the villain of the piece, and the player, and basically them being hunted because of it. And then we get to the older scenario, The Shadow over Darkbank, which refers back to the canal network, and the player characters, the investigators, go on a canal holiday, and that's probably a bit different for you imagine, sort of like for most people outside of the UK or even Europe. The idea of sort of like going on a holiday on the canals does happen. You just get a barge and just troll along the canals at a very sedate pace. I've not been on one since I was a small boy, and I have to say, as a small boy, they're not very exciting. As an adult, they're probably quite relaxing. But yeah, so we have a grand mystery, because obviously the other thing about canals is that you actually, you travel for so long, you moor up for the night, and you stop. Perhaps you stop outside an inn or a tavern and go in for a pint or two and a pie and that sort of thing, and a bit of company, and then you go back to your barge and carry on the next day. And so it's a bit of I say not quite a knees up, but sort of like a bit of a jolly holiday. And then of course you have the beautiful countryside for the player characters and the investigators to look at. Things to like take a dark turn in the particular tunnels. And here we've got a network of the tunnels, which will take the player characters, the investigators, to strange places. And then we've got, lastly, The Running Man, a piece of fiction by Brian Lumley, whose fiction has also occurred in, it basically has been put alongside Call of Cthulhu content before, most notably in issue 12, issue 13 of Imagine magazine. So yeah, that's Green and Pleasant Land, published by Games Workshop in 1987. Very nicely done for the time, source book for the United Kingdom, with some quite lovely scenarios. And certainly fairly sort of a plummy take upon class structure and the type of play you would have in Call of Cthulhu at the time. I would suspect it may well be slightly more nuanced these days, but nevertheless, this is worth tracking down. The scenarios are great. The artwork is fantastic. Martin McKenna's artwork is lovely, and the cover is excellent. I mean, just if I can just put that past the cat, quite subtle. And he's just going to go on, off you go. Oh, you're making a pig's ear of that. Well done, cat. So yes, despite what the cat attempted to derail this, I hope you have enjoyed this unboxing the Nook. If you have, then please do click on the like button down below. And of course, you've got any comments or feedback, I appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to yet more unboxings in the Nook, where you will see me out here with a parcel containing a book or game or supplements, which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 2 minutes or so. all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do hit that subscribe button down below. Once again, thanks for watching another unboxing in the Nook. We'll be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.